Life on Earth has always depended on a very fragile balance. When this is affected by the slightest change, great calamities can happen. What is still considered the greatest pandemic in human history began in a simple, almost unnoticeable way, but it quickly became a cause of enormous suffering and despair throughout the civilized world. That is the story of the Black Death. Population growth led humans to build even larger cities, which caused environmental issues, as many forests had to be cleared to enable the construction of new homes or plantations. As time went by, other living creatures, such as birds, dogs, and cats, learned to live with human beings in cities. But there were also less desirable creatures to have around, such as insects, reptiles, and rodents, known to be sources of disease and danger to people's lives. Even so, the proximity between humans and animals was inevitable during the Middle Ages. It was not uncommon to see pigs, goats, and chickens next to people in the muddy streets of the poorest areas of the cities. The first reports of the appearance of a mysterious disease appeared around the 12th century in East Asia. It was a troubled historical period, as the Earth was going through a wave of global warming, which decimated many plantations. This caused hunger in the cities, even creating deserts in regions that were once full of green pastures. Climate change forced many animals to migrate to places with a milder climate. Several species of rodents left their natural inhabitants in the grasslands of Mongolia and northern China, infesting Chinese cities and villages. Amid that chaotic context, the fearsome Mongols, commanded by the great Genghis Khan, began their military campaign to conquer China. The Mongol invasions forced the Chinese to close their cities, which were already suffering from food shortages and overpopulation of people and animals. It was the perfect scenario for the spread of diseases, especially among the lower classes of society, who were unable to comply with basic hygiene practices, such as taking baths every day or wearing clean clothes at the end of the day. Fleas, lice, and ticks were common problems in everyday life, but rats coming from rural areas brought with them fleas infected with the new bacterium, known today as Yersinia pestis. When an infected flea bites a human being, the bacterium quickly invades the victim's immune system, causing high fever, pain all over the body, nausea, and mental confusion. Approximately 5 to 7 days after exposure to the bacteria, the body has localized edemas, which can ignite and create wounds known as buboes. Therefore, the disease is also called the bubonic plague. The term Black Plague comes from another frightening symptom, gangrene that hits certain parts of the body, such as the fingers and toes, which turn black. At a more advanced stage, the disease can progress into a serious lung infection, causing shortness of breath, chest pain, and coughing. At this stage, it is more contagious, as it can be transmitted by air. It is believed that in the short time between 1330 and 1350, about 25 million people, among Chinese and Mongols, died of the Black Death. The disease was already spreading to other countries through the Silk Road, because the rats and their fleas were hiding in the goods transported by the traders. Even with a huge calamity happening in Asia, the Mongols continued to conquer city after city, advancing westward, reaching the Crimean Peninsula on the northern coast of the Black Sea. The Mongols besieged the city of Caffa, at the time a Genoese colony and an important trading post for Italians and traders from other parts of the world. The city, highly protected by its walls, resisted the Mongols, who quickly found a solution to terrorize their enemies. The Mongols collected the bodies of the soldiers who were victims of the Black Death. Using catapults and trebuchets, the infected bodies were thrown over the city walls, stinking the streets and the air with a putrid and deadly odor. People quickly panicked because they knew of the threat posed by the disease. Those who could fled the city as quickly as possible. Genoese traders are considered responsible for bringing the Black Death to Europe. In their attempt to escape the Mongols as much as possible, they sailed to many different cities and places, such as Constantinople, Sicily, Marseille, and the Italian peninsula. The rats hiding in the middle of the ship's goods reproduced quickly, leaving the ships with enormous ease when they were moored into the ports. The plague reached Europe, and the consequences would be devastating. As in Asia, Europe was also experiencing serious sanitation problems and shortages. Malnutrition affected many families, making people's health more fragile and susceptible to disease. It only took 5 years for the plague to spread across the European continent, reaching distant Norway in 1349 and parts of Russia in 1351. The countries most affected were those that depended mainly on maritime trade, proving that the pandemic spread around the world with the help of human beings. The scariest thing was that people didn't know what caused that terrible disease. Despair quickly took over their lives. The few first accounts written at that time were disturbing. Thousands of people died every day. Cemeteries no longer had room for the number of dead, and bodies began to pile up in the streets. The stench in the cities was unbearable, and hunger spread more and more, causing waves of violence and looting among the population, who desperately sought to feed their families. To get rid of the bodies rotting in the streets, Pope Clement VI ordered the corpses to be thrown into the rivers to be carried away by running water. But this only made the situation worse, since the water became contaminated in many cities. Without having anywhere to run, people isolated themselves in their homes or sought refuge in churches, which only made things worse, because the disease could also be transmitted by air. The agglomerations in closed places facilitated the spread of fleas and lice. According to the religious view of the chroniclers of the time, it was as if God had abandoned humanity completely, releasing the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse to spread the plague, war, famine, and death. According to the calculations, the Black Death killed 40% of the European population in a few years. The population of some cities was reduced by half. Although there is no exact estimate, the number of deaths may have exceeded 100 million throughout Eurasia. Other parts of the world also suffered from the Black Plague. Egypt, Lebanon, Damascus, Jerusalem, and many other cities in Africa and the Middle East were infected and paid a high price in human lives. The impact of the Black Death on European culture was depicted in many paintings and literary works of the Middle Ages. Death started to be portrayed as an entity that follows and dances around human beings. This new notion of the fragility of life and the human body was an inspiration for many Renaissance authors and researchers who created works from medicinal studies and theories. One of the most important figures of the Great Pandemic were the plague doctors. These were rarely professional doctors, but they tried to administer improvised treatments with medicinal herbs, bloodletting, and vapors to try to purify the air. Since they believed the disease was transmitted through supposedly contaminated air, these doctors started wearing bird head masks, putting aromatic herbs on their beaks to ward off the odor of wounds and the dead. Despite being iconic symbols of that period, the plague doctors only began wearing their famous dark robes in 1630, when they struggled to fight new outbreaks throughout Europe. The Black Death only began to be better controlled around the 14th century, when new hygienic measures were adopted in the medieval cities. Still, many people lost their lives over the centuries. Cases of epidemics occurred already in the modern age, such as the 12 outbreaks of plague in Australia between 1900 and 1925, and the epidemic in North America between 1900 and 1908. With the breakthroughs in modern medicine, treatments from the bubonic plague were created, very effective in the early stages of the disease. The Black Death was a bitter lesson for humanity, and the terror it caused still echoes in the memory and culture of many countries. A sad memory of a dark time.